Elliot's heart raced as his boots crunched against the wet underbrush, the dense forest surrounding him casting eerie shadows under the dim light of an alien sun. He had been lost for what felt like days, the wreckage of his ship lying miles behind him in a forest of impossibly tall trees. The air tasted thick with moisture and the scent of unfamiliar, pungent flowers that seemed to call out to him. There was no sign of civilization, only the overwhelming silence that hung like a heavy fog. And then he heard her. The sound was faint at first, like the rustling of wind against thick leaves. But it was followed by a sharp, guttural growl, something far larger than anything Elliot had encountered in this alien world. He instinctively dropped to a crouch, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. His pulse thundered in his ears as he scanned the trees, but saw nothing. Then, a whisper of movement. A flash of something massive, a shadow in the canopy above. It happened so quickly. Before Elliot could react, the ground beneath his feet trembled as a figure dropped silently before him. His eyes widened as the woman, a giant, loomed over him, her radiant blue eyes locking onto his with an intensity that struck deep within him. She stood at least 10 feet tall, her long hair cascading like dark silk, and her body was sculpted with power and grace. She wore little, save for a series of intricate tattoos that covered her skin in patterns that looked like ancient symbols, their meanings lost to him. She regarded him with a gaze that was both curious and commanding. "You are human," she said, her voice low and soothing, yet filled with authority. It was a sound that vibrated through the air, something primal and haunting, impossible to ignore. Elliot took a cautious step back, his mind racing. "Why, yes," he stammered, trying to make sense of his situation. The last thing he remembered was the crash. Nothing about this world had made sense since he awoke in the wreckage. And now, this giant woman, who seemed to have appeared out of thin air, was staring at him like a puzzle that didn't quite fit. She took a deliberate step forward, her presence filling the space between them. "Do not fear me," she said, her tone softening. "I will not harm you." Elliot's mouth went dry. Fear was one thing, curiosity was another. He'd heard stories of strange creatures on planets far from Earth, but nothing prepared him for this. The raw power that exuded from her was palpable. His eyes flicked over her. Her beauty was striking, but it wasn't just physical. It was in the way she held herself, with a kind of poised strength that spoke of ages spent ruling over her domain. What are you?" Elliot asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It felt foolish, but he couldn't think of a better question. Her expression softened, and for the briefest moment, there was a flicker of something vulnerable in her gaze. "I am Kira," she said, tilting her head, "leader of my people, and you are the one we've waited for." He blinked, caught off guard by her words. "Waited for?" he echoed. "I'm just an explorer. I don't know what you—" Kira stepped closer, her towering form casting a shadow over him. "We've searched for years," she continued, her voice now edged with desperation. "Our people are dying, and we need you, need what only you can provide." She reached down, her fingers brushing against his chest as if she were gauging his very essence. His heart skipped a beat. There was something about her, something unsettlingly magnetic. Her touch was gentle, but there was an undeniable force behind it, as though she could crush him if she chose. "What do you mean? What only I can provide?" Elliot asked, his voice tight. His mind spun in circles, the words not quite making sense. Kira didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stared at him for a long, heavy moment, her eyes darkening with a mixture of pain and resolve. "We are a dying people," she said, her tone becoming more urgent. "Our race is unable to reproduce without your kind. The few of us left, our women, are barren. Only human men can give us the children we need." Elliot's breath hitched. He hadn't heard anything like this in his life. His instincts screamed at him to run, to flee this impossible situation, but something deeper tugged at him, something he couldn't name. "You're asking me to father your children?" His voice was barely audible, disbelief lacing every syllable. Kira didn't flinch at his words. "Yes," she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You are the last hope for my people." His chest tightened, a whirlwind of emotions colliding within him. This was absurd. But even as he thought those words, he found himself unable to move. Her presence was overwhelming, her gaze soft but insistent. She stood there, waiting for him to respond, to decide the fate of a world that felt so distant, yet now felt so close. "But I don't even know who you are," Elian muttered, his voice thick with uncertainty. I'm just a man who's lost. How could I possibly help you?" His thoughts raced. Was this some kind of trick? A deception? Or was it the truth? Did it matter? Kira's expression remained unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. A yearning, a longing that ran deeper than any surface explanation could account for. "You are what we need. And more." Her voice dropped, becoming softer, as if revealing something too intimate. "Without you, we will fade into nothingness." A silence stretched between them, thick with unsaid words. Elian's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of the situation pressing in on him. Every instinct told him to run, but something he couldn't explain, made him hesitate. He looked up at Kira, standing so tall and impossibly beautiful, and realized that she was not asking him out of selfishness. She was asking him because, in this strange world, their survival depended on him. His lips parted as if to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. Finally, he took a deep breath and stepped closer to her, the space between them narrowing with each moment. I don't know if I can do this, but I'll help. I'll try." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Kira's lips, a rare, vulnerable expression that softened her formidable presence. "Then, let us begin," she whispered. And in that moment, Elian realized that his life, his entire future, had just changed. "You said?" The forest was alive with noise, an unfamiliar, eerie symphony of sounds that Elian couldn't quite place. The low hum of distant creatures, the snap of branches underfoot, the rustle of the wind through leaves that were far too large for his eyes to comprehend, all of it was a constant reminder of just how far he was from home. Kira led him deeper into the woods, her towering frame slicing through the underbrush effortlessly. Elian followed closely behind, his boots sinking into the soft earth with each step. The air was thick with moisture, but there was a strange heat, a pressure that felt like it was pressing down on him from all sides. His mind was still reeling from their initial conversation, his thoughts a swirl of confusion, fascination, and fear. He stole a glance at Kira, watching the way she moved, so powerful yet graceful. There was an undeniable magnetism to her, an aura that made the trees themselves seem to part for her. Her presence was commanding, yet there was something vulnerable in her eyes, a hint of fear he hadn't noticed before. "I didn't expect you to accept so quickly," Kira said, her voice cutting through the forest's ambient noise. She didn't look back at him, but Elian could hear the slight tremor in her tone, a thread of uncertainty woven through the words. Elian tightened his jaw, unsure of what to say. He wasn't sure what had made him agree to help her, much less how he could possibly fulfill the request she'd made. But here he was, walking alongside a woman who, by all rights, was far beyond anything he could comprehend. His heart still thudded in his chest, but there was something else, something more powerful, building inside him. He couldn't explain it, but it was there. "I don't know what I'm getting into," he said, his voice low, but there was no hiding the resolve underneath the uncertainty. "But I'm here now. What happens next?" Kira's eyes flicked to him for the briefest moment, the corners of her lips twitching as though she was suppressing a smile. "Next," she began, "we will prepare you for what is to come. You have much to learn. Our way of life is different from yours." The words hung heavy in the air, and Elian swallowed hard. "I can't even begin to understand it all, can I?" "No," Kira replied, her voice tinged with something almost like pity. "But perhaps you can try." The journey took them to a vast clearing, surrounded by towering trees whose trunks were thick and gnarled, roots reaching out like ancient hands. At the center of the clearing was an enormous structure made of woven branches and leaves, a primitive dwelling, yet beautifully constructed. It was here that Kira led him, stopping at the entrance and turning to face him fully. "The others are waiting," she said softly. Her expression hardened. "They know you're here, but they don't understand why." Elian nodded. He couldn't help but feel small as he stood there, dwarfed by the grandeur of the world around him. He didn't belong here, not really. The towering trees, the strange, vibrant flowers, the alien scent of the air, all of it felt foreign, unwelcoming. But then there was Kira, her presence both an anchor and an enigma. She stepped forward and entered the structure, motioning for him to follow. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of earth and wood, the walls illuminated by flickering firelight. A circle of women, all giants like Kira, sat around a low fire in the center, their eyes glistening with curiosity as they observed Elian's every move. They were unlike anything Elian had ever seen, beautiful, powerful, and entirely out of his league. Each one had an air of quiet authority, yet there was an undercurrent of desperation, like they were waiting for something to happen, for something to change. Kira moved to the center of the group, and they all turned to her in unison, their expressions solemn. "This is Elian," Kira said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "He has come to help us." A murmur ran through the women. Some exchanged uncertain glances, while others studied Elian with sharp, calculating eyes. One of the women, her silver hair cascading like a waterfall down her back, spoke. "You bring a human to us, Kira?" Her tone was disbelieving, but there was something else in her gaze, curiosity, perhaps even hope. "What makes you think he can save us?" Kira's jaw tightened, but she did not back down. "Elian is our last chance. The humans are the key to our survival." "And you trust him?" The woman pressed, her gaze flicking briefly to Elian before returning to Kira. "I trust him," Kira replied, her voice firm, though a flicker of uncertainty still lingered beneath her words. She turned to Elian then, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "We all must trust each other if we are to move forward." The words struck Elian like a blow to the chest. Trust. He'd never considered himself someone who could be trusted, not with something this monumental. But there was something about Kira, something about this world, that made him want to believe, to fight for them, even if he had no idea how. The silence that followed was thick with tension. The women, all towering over him, seemed to be weighing his very existence in their minds. Elian felt small again, out of place. He opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again, unsure of what to say. What could he possibly offer them, except his presence? What did they expect from him? "We don't have time," Kira said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. "The threat is growing closer. Our enemies know we are vulnerable. We have to prepare, and we must do so quickly." "What threat?" Elian asked, his pulse quickening. Kira's gaze turned steely, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly afraid. "Another tribe. A rival group. They want what we have, and they will stop at nothing to take it." A chill ran down Elian's spine. He'd been running from the crash site for days, and had no idea what dangers were out there in this alien world. But now, standing before Kira and the other women, He realized the true weight of what he'd stepped into. "We need you," Kira said, her voice softer now. "We need your strength. You can help us fight back." The words were a challenge, a plea, and something deeper, something unspoken. Elian met her gaze, his own uncertainty mirrored in her eyes. He had no idea how to fight for them, no idea how to become the man they needed him to be. But one thing was clear, he was in this now, whether he wanted to be or not. "Then let's begin," he said, the weight of the decision settling heavy on his shoulders. And as Kira stepped forward, her presence overwhelming, Elian knew that this was just the beginning. The choices he made now would shape not just his future, but theirs as well. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, casting its pale golden light across the forest floor as Elian stood before the grand stone gates of the rival tribe's stronghold. The weight of the decision still lingered heavily on his chest. The conflict wasn't just external anymore. It had begun to erode his sense of self. Kira's presence beside him was steady, unwavering. She had been by his side since the moment he had agreed to fight for her people, and now the time had come to face the enemy. The tribe of women who had once been strangers to him had become something more, something vital. And yet, even as his heart swelled with purpose, doubt gnawed at him. Could he truly help them? Was he capable of becoming what they needed, what Kira needed? "You're silent today," Kira remarked, her voice a soft murmur against the rising winds. She studied him, the expression on her face unreadable. "Are you regretting your decision?" Elian looked over at her. She was tall, even more so than he remembered, her strength radiating outward like an invisible force field. Her eyes, the same pale blue as the sky at dawn, seemed to bore into his very soul. "I'm not sure I know what I'm doing," he admitted, the honesty slipping out before he could stop it. "I'm just trying to hold it all together." Her gaze softened, and for the first time, she reached out to him, not with the authority of a leader, but with the tenderness of someone who understood. "You don't have to hold everything together," Kira said, her voice barely a whisper. "Just be here. Be present." Her touch was like fire and ice, an electric current that ran through him with surprising force. His heart skipped, and he felt an unfamiliar stir of something deeper than camaraderie, something more intense. The moment stretched, lingering longer than either of them expected. But just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed, and Elian was left with the pounding of his own pulse in his ears. He cleared his throat, breaking the tension between them. "Right. Present." He took a deep breath, his mind clearing for a moment, before the harsh reality of their situation settled back in. "So we have to go through there," he muttered, pointing toward the looming gates ahead. Kira's expression hardened. "Yes. We have no choice. The rival tribe has grown bolder. If we don't strike first, they will come for us. They've already raided one of our supply depots." "What exactly are they after?" Elian asked, curiosity mixing with the weight of responsibility. His mind was trying to piece together the puzzle, but it seemed like too many pieces were missing. "They want more than just supplies. They want what we have, our future," Kira replied, her voice laced with a quiet fury. "They know that our people are dying, and they believe they can take what we need." Elian nodded, his stomach turning at the thought. "And they think they can do that by taking you, by taking the women of your tribe?" Kira didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. The truth hung heavily in the air between them, the unspoken reality that the enemy tribe would stop at nothing to take what they saw as theirs. Elian swallowed. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered, more to himself than to her. The weight of the situation was almost too much to bear. He had never been a soldier, had never been someone trained to fight. But here, now, his choices were limited. Kira heard the uncertainty in his voice and stepped closer to him, her gaze locking with his. "You are more than you know, Elian. You have strength in you that you've yet to find. He wanted to protest, to tell her that she was wrong. But the truth was, her words stirred something deep inside of him, a flicker of courage, the smallest spark of hope that he could make a difference. Maybe, just maybe he could. Before he could respond, the gates ahead of them opened with a loud groan, revealing the enemy tribe's stronghold. The rival tribe was unlike Kira's people. Where her tribe was elegant, a part of the natural world, these giants were more militant, their features hardened by the brutality of constant warfare. They were powerful, their bodies thick with muscle, their armor made from the bones and skins of the creatures they hunted. At the forefront of the stronghold stood a woman, tall, nearly as towering as Kira herself, but with a harshness in her expression that contrasted Kira's calm grace. She wore dark armor etched with symbols of power, and her piercing green eyes locked onto Elian with a look of disdain. "Elian, meet Elora," Kira murmured, her voice quiet but filled with a tension that Elian could feel down to his bones. "Leader of the rival tribe." Elora's gaze slid over Elian, dismissive, her lips curling in a faint sneer. "I see what you brought us," she said, her voice thick with derision. "A human. How quaint." Elian felt a jolt of indignation rise in him, but he swallowed it down. "I'm not here for your amusement," he said, his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "I'm here because your actions are putting everything at risk." Elora's laugh was sharp, cutting through the tense air like a knife. "Risk? You think you can threaten me? You don't know what you're dealing with, human. You are nothing." Kira stepped forward, her stance defiant. "We are not here to make threats, Elora. We're here because we have no choice. Your attacks have left us no other option." The tension between the two women crackled like an electric storm. Elora's lips twisted into a cruel smile. "No choice? You've always had a choice, Kira. But you've made your bed." The word stung more than Elian expected. It was clear that this wasn't just a power struggle. This was personal. "We're not here to fight," Kira said, her voice firm. "But we will defend ourselves." Elian's heart beat faster. The words hung heavy in the air, and as Kira's words sank in, he realized that this was no longer just about survival. It was about something more. Something he hadn't yet fully understood. With one final glance at Kira, Elian stepped forward, standing beside her. The tension was unbearable. But there was no turning back now. They had chosen their side. And in that moment, Elian knew one thing. This fight, this battle for their future, was just beginning. The air hung heavy with the promise of conflict. Elian could feel the tension in the pit of his stomach, the weight of impending battle settling in his chest like a stone. The words exchanged with Elora still echoed in his mind, her sneering confidence both a threat and a challenge. But more than that, it was the look in Kira's eyes that stayed with him, the vulnerability mixed with determination, the unspoken fear that this battle could break them all. Standing side by side with her, Elian knew that this moment wasn't just about survival. It was about forging something new, a bond that could transcend the barriers between their species, between their worlds. "Stay close," Kira's voice broke through his thoughts. Her command was gentle, but there was a hardness to it that left no room for argument. He nodded, his hand brushing against hers for the briefest moment. The contact, though fleeting, sent a jolt of warmth through him. There was a bond between them now, something unspoken but undeniable. Something stronger than fear or uncertainty. It was trust, and it was everything. The gates of the stronghold loomed ahead, massive and imposing, but the true danger lay within. The rival tribe wasn't just a physical threat. They represented everything Kira's people feared, the extinction of their kind, the eradication of their legacy. And Elian, he had become a crucial part of that fight. The thought should have terrified him, but there was something else, a deep sense of purpose that pulled him forward. As they crossed the threshold of the stronghold, the temperature seemed to drop. the air thick with the scent of steel and tension. The once beautiful, natural landscape was replaced with jagged stone walls, cold and unwelcoming. Elliot's senses heightened, every creak of the wooden beams above, and the shuffling of boots on the stone floor amplified in the silence. The rival tribe's warriors were assembled, their eyes filled with suspicion and disdain as they took in Alien. They were large, massive, even, but their presence lacked the elegance that defined Kira's people. These giants were warriors, hardened by years of conflict, their bodies thick with muscle, and their faces marked by scars of battle. Elora stood at the forefront, her cold eyes scanning them, as if she were appraising a collection of livestock. "I didn't expect you to come so boldly," she said, her voice dripping with venom as she addressed Kira. "But it's too late to stop us now." Kira stepped forward, her posture regal despite the circumstances. "We're not here to negotiate, Elora. We're here because we have no choice. We will defend ourselves." Elora's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Defend yourselves? You think your human will save you?" The words cut deeper than Elian expected. He had known he was an outsider in this world, but hearing his role reduced to mere currency, something to be used, something to be thrown away, stung. He wanted to lash out, to prove them wrong, but he kept his emotions in check, forcing himself to remain calm. This wasn't the time for pride. It was time for action. "I'm not here to be your pawn," Elian said, stepping forward and meeting Elora's gaze with as much defiance as he could muster. "I'm here to protect what's mine." At his words, Kira's gaze shifted to him, a brief flicker of something passing between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something close, something that spoke of trust, of shared purpose. Elora laughed, the sound cold and bitter. "Your strength means nothing here, human. You're out of your depth." But Kira wasn't listening to Elora anymore. She turned her attention to the warriors around her, each one of them poised for battle. "Get ready," she commanded, her voice sharp and full of authority. "We fight for our survival." The clash came swiftly. Elora's warriors surged forward with terrifying speed, their massive forms crashing into Kira's tribe with the force of a tidal wave. Elian's heart pounded as he moved instinctively, his body moving faster than his mind could keep up. He had never been a fighter, but the adrenaline surged through him like wildfire, his senses sharpening as the chaos erupted around him. Kira's tribe fought with grace, their movements fluid and controlled, but they were outnumbered. Elian's eyes darted to Kira, who was engaged in combat with Elora's second-in-command, her blade flashing through the air with deadly precision. He felt a surge of protectiveness, an urge to step in and help, but he knew he had a different role to play. He moved with purpose, his body reacting before his mind could form a plan. He didn't have the skill of Kira's warriors, but he had something else, determination. He fought not just for survival, but for them, for Kira, for the women who had accepted him into their world, for the future that was slipping through their fingers. The fight raged on, the sound of clashing weapons and grunts of exertion filling the air. Elian's heart raced as he parried a blow from one of Elora's warriors, barely managing to deflect the massive sword aimed at him. His hands were shaking, his body bruised and battered, but he refused to stop. Through the chaos, his eyes found Kira again. She was locked in a deadly struggle with Elora, their blades colliding with such force that sparks flew into the air. Elian's stomach twisted. He had never seen Kira like this, so fierce, so relentless. There was something beautiful in the way she fought, an elegance to her power that spoke of years of training, years of sacrifice. He knew he couldn't let her fight alone. He couldn't let her bear the weight of everything on her shoulders. With renewed determination, Elian lunged into the fray, his focus solely on the woman who had come to mean so much to him. He fought his way toward her, every movement driven by a single purpose. Kira's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. A silent understanding passed between them. This fight was theirs, together. Elian's body screamed in protest, but he didn't care. He had chosen this. He had chosen her. With one final, desperate push, he reached her side, his blade raised in defense as Kira's eyes flickered to him in surprise, and something more. Something that made her smile, just for a moment. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for a future, together. The battle was far from over, but in that moment, Elian knew that whatever happened next, they would face it as one.